Well, good evening, everybody. How we doing? Spectre here on the 5x5 channel. Time for a little fireside chat tonight, I thought. Kind of a chilly night in the central part of the country here, in old deplorable flyover country. A little dusting of snow earlier tonight. So tonight, I figure, what the heck, fire up the old fire here. Get a little toasty, gather round, grab your favorite beverage of choice, a little coffee, a little hot cocoa, a little cider, a little cinnamon stick, hot toddy, whatever. Gather around the fire, get a little cozy here this evening, because baby, it's cold outside. So that's what we're going to do here tonight. El Jefe, good to see you, man. Chilly in Texas tonight, too, yep. How we doing tonight? Nikki B, Beverly Fraser, Hut Nugget, good to see you. Jean's Pretty Pups. Good evening, Patriots. Yes. Still waiting for D-Live to come up. Not sure what's going on with it there. It's having trouble receiving the signal. It's not getting a 5x5 tonight, apparently. So hang tight, folks, if you're waiting to get in on D-Live. Looks like Twitch were to the good. YouTube were to the good. But nonetheless, we're going to start the party off anyway. So in any case, like I said, just gather around. Not going to throw much on the screen, just a fire tonight. Let the old crackling sounds do its thing. I do have a handful of articles and I don't want to cover here tonight. So sit back, relax. Like I said, it's beverage choice and we'll hit it. So that being said, one of the first things I want to talk about, we'll have a little interaction here. We'll go back and forth a little bit with you guys in chat. Whatever comes your way, strikes your fancy. This came through yesterday. Wealth taxes, masked Nazis, and COVID crackdowns. Oh my. That's by Simon Black over at Sovereign Man. And on a week-over-week basis, he pulls together some of the absurd articles that come and grace his feed and shares that with us. And I see a lot of the same ones as well. So that being said, let's hit it. It says, are you ready for this week's absurdity? Here's our Friday roll-up of the most ridiculous stories from around the world that are threats to your liberty, risks to your prosperity, and, on occasion, inspiring poetic justice. So first on the docket, this is in response to COVID-19, Argentina implemented strict lockdowns which further destroyed its already struggling economy. And Argentina's lockdowns did not achieve the government's objective of slowing the spread of the disease. Oh no, now these brilliant politicians think they have found the solution to rebuild. You know, a new wealth tax. The government introduced a quote-unquote one-time wealth tax which affects any Argentine with assets totaling $2.4 million or more. These citizens will owe up to 3.5% of their total net worth to the government and 5.25% of any wealth held outside of Argentina. The government plans to use the money to pay for healthcare supplies, small business relief, scholarships, and some natural gas ventures. They might as well also buy a billboard that says, "Do not bring your wealth to Argentina." So, yeah, that is Argentina. Do you think our idiot politicians here in these United States would try to do something similar? Oh, I would not put it past them to try. I mean, hell, let's, for the sake of argument, suggest that Biden does get in. He's already promised that our taxes will go up because they spend like drunken sailors. They have no ability to rein in any sort of spending. They never met any programs they didn't like. And do you think for 1 second that any program that comes to fruition, anything falls off the backside? Oh, hell no. Of course not. We'll just keep adding to the fire. No pun intended here. So continuing on, it says the masked Nazis volunteer to patrol Pasadena streets. So here come the Karens, folks, look out. COVID brown shirts will be lurking the streets of Pasadena, California to catch people not wearing masks in public. Society's hall monitors will ridicule and intimidate you until you put on a mask. Last week, they told some runners in a park that they needed to wear masks while running outdoors by themselves. Well, at least the runners were by themselves until the masked Nazis approached. Maybe next we can start COVID youth, so School kids can inform on their family's social distancing habits. Oh wait, the governor of Vermont is way ahead of us. So, sorry about that, Vermont. Apparently your gov has already beat us to the punch. Thousands of foreigners received stimulus checks from good old Uncle Sam because, our IRS is so efficient at distributing the checks, right? The IRS sent thousands of $1,200 stimulus checks to foreigners. In effect, people who are not U.S. citizens at foreign addresses who did not qualify to receive the funds. At first, the IRS tried to blame the recipients, saying they must have incorrectly filed a U.S. tax return. Now, the tax agency admits it was its own error, which sent millions of dollars of taxpayer money to ineligible non-Americans overseas. But that's still not as bad as the 1 million checks sent to dead people. I'll tell you, these dead people gotta be the richest voting class ever brought forth on these lands. Who knew you could be one so rich, dead? Apparently you can take your money with you, somehow. And at the same time, you magically always vote Democratic. Isn't that funny how that works? Crazy. Yeah. Good to see you out there, Vernon Peterson. Good to have you aboard here this evening. Appreciate you tuning in. Let's see here. Alright, University Alum. It's almost cold enough to be comfortable. Still having to throw the AC on. AC? Where in the world are you at? You got to turn the AC on this time of year. Holy moly. San Antonio, 4 seasons, mild warm weather, hot spring, hellish summer, and Indian summer. Hate it. Well, come up a little bit further north. You'll at least get 2 seasons. Cold in the morning and hot in the afternoon and everything in between. Nicky B, good to see you. Alum, same here. One of our super fans out there. Appreciate you tuning in. Alright, so continuing on with the stories here. It says, however, in both cases, the IRS has no plans to recover the money. Yeah, there's a shocker. Belgium won't allow your guests to use the bathroom. So, if you live in a blue state here in this country, you know the ridiculousness of the stuff going on, especially in Newsom world and in Cuomo world, the delusional BS that they put you through there. Belgium apparently wants to up the ante and see who can be the craziest despot out there. It says in Belgium, the government will graciously allow you to invite up to 4 guests to your home for the holidays, but they have to stay outside in the yard. In fact, they are not even allowed to pass through your house to enter your backyard. There has to be direct access to your backyard from outdoors. Hopefully, Grandma can still hop the fence. And your guests will not be allowed to go inside your home to use the bathroom. They have to go home if they need to relieve themselves. Virologists admitted that walking through a home is unlikely to spread COVID, but added that grown adults can't be trusted to not stop and have a chat. I got a better idea. What about that tree in the backyard? Apparently Belgians don't have trees in the backyard, I guess. Who knows? Insanity. These people have lost their frickin' minds, and now they think they're going to control people not being able to walk through your damn house. In regards to vaccine delivery tests, half these supplies were shipped to the wrong state. So, apparently Operation Warp Speed is not as warp speed as we thought. Or perhaps maybe FedEx or UPS or perhaps even the Postal Service, as efficient as they are, apparently must have gotten it slightly wrong. And so we see this as Colorado public health officials are preparing for a massive statewide vaccination, so state agencies have started rehearsing the distribution process. Specifically, how are they going to receive and warehouse millions of doses? In the first major test of the state's distribution capabilities, they were supposed to receive 2 bulk shipments from the federal government, essentially simulating the arrival of COVID vaccines. Only 1 shipment arrived to Colorado. The other, for some inexplicable reason, ended up in Kentucky. But 50-50 is still good enough for government work, and the state of Colorado declared this trial run a smashing success. And people wonder why we don't trust the government. Is it possible because they just don't give a shit at the end of the day? Is that it? Why would anybody put their faith and trust in good old Uncle Sam at this point? I mean, if 1 out of 2 is good, it's just life or death. No biggie, right? Insanity. High schoolers can wrestle as long as they don't shake hands first. Are you kidding me? Ohio officials have issued rules to make high school sports safer in times of COVID-19. Wrestlers must stay 6 feet apart and wear masks while on the bench and warming up. When they enter the ring, they are prohibited from shaking hands. Only then does it become safe to grapple your sweaty, heavy-breathing opponent and roll around on the ground together for 6 minutes. But they don't shake hands, so it's all good. Conclusion? COVID spreads from shaking hands, but not from wrestling. Just like COVID spreads in churches and synagogues, but not at peaceful protests. Remember, we must listen to the scientists. Who the hell comes up with this stuff? COVID apparently spreads by shaking hands but not wrestling on the ground. Wrestling. Grappling. Hello? What sort of... I have to curb my language here. Hypocrisy roundup. Politicians who don't follow their own rules. If you followed any of my shows here recently, I did highlight many of those here recently regarding the whole COVID idiocy. Those who don't practice what they preach. And of course they never will, because they think they're holier than thou. Says we have 2 more politicians to add to this week's hypocrisy roundup for violating their own COVID-19 rules. Chile announced fresh lockdowns this week with masks required in public at all times, including outdoors. Meanwhile, the president of Chile, Sebastián Piñera, was photographed on the beach without a mask, standing directly next to someone who asked for a photograph. The president claims he will report himself and pay the fine. After only being caught, of course. And then, of course, back up to Chicago, where, of course, we've seen Beetlejuice, do the very same thing. Not to be outdone, of course, a Chicago city councilor was caught allowing customers inside a restaurant he owns, despite a citywide rule against serving customers indoors. He called it an error in judgment and said it will not continue, only after being caught, of course. So, there you have it, folks. Some of the idiocy going on out there. Absolutely insane. And we're expected to believe in these jokers? Nah, I don't think so. Well, not to be outdone. Diane says they make it this absurd to see if we're really going to listen to their mandates. Yep, Americans still wear them. Yep. Yeah, I mean, not only the level of hypocrisy, but the mental gymnastics one has to do on the one hand and say, yes, I totally believe what the idiots like Fauci, F-A-U-X-C-I, say about mask mandates when he flip-flops more than a frickin' flip-flop. But at the same time, we're told to believe, to accept the results of the election. The other night I put a graphic up. Somebody created a meme that says 1 in 10,000 or whatever it was on dispersal of COVID or something along those lines. We're led to believe that 1 in 10,000 is bad, but yet 1 in 10,000 is not bad, I guess, in terms of fraud in the election. I mean, it just, again, the mental gymnastics one has to go through to hold thoughts of that regard and still put their quote-unquote faith in government is insane. Heard a great phrase from a caller on conservative radio. Governor, if you really want to spend Christmas with Grandma, don't bring her to your home. Take her to a nice BLM riot, COVID-free. It's either that or you do like some of the churches that have started doing. Well, guess what? If you're going to prevent us from having 10, 15 folks congregate in our building, hell, we'll just take service over to the local Walmart. I mean, because, you let a few thousand of your closest friends in a big box store. I mean, it obviously doesn't spread there. Let's see. Golf 62 1963 says, Spectre, come to Morris tomorrow, 12 p.m. meetup. Oh. Wish I could. I do have a prior obligation, unfortunately, so I will have to try and make the next one. Do let me know, though. Appreciate the heads up. Very interesting. Mr. Rona's kicked off YouTube. Sorry, caffeine addict. Oh, fix it. Yeah, let's see. You're crazy early like you this morning. For like Snap Crackle Pop gives us my best. Alright. Yeah, I don't know what the heck happened to D-Live here this evening. Apparently it didn't want to play ball. So apparently it's trying. We'll deal nonetheless. Alright, like I said, carrying on that theme, Paul Joseph Watson had this out of Summit News here today. It says, an NHS commercial terrifies kids by showing Santa stricken with COVID. So, obviously, the NHS, the health safety folks and that over in the UK, television commercial for the NHS terrifies children by showing Santa Claus wheeled into a hospital on the verge of dying from COVID. Now, who in the hell in their right mind would do such a thing? Because frightening kids is definitely what the good guys do. The advertisement celebrates NHS staff and volunteers by showing them nursing Father Christmas back to full health so he can deliver presents. Entitled The Gift, the ad shows paramedics giving Santa oxygen as he looks to be at death's door while being transported to a medical ward as one nurse asks, "Is he responding?" And apparently the video must have already been taken down because it's no longer showing up inside the article here. But the commercial then cuts to Santa waking up before he is slowly rehabilitated and subsequently receives a get well soon card from Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer. After having passed some children, Santa is then seen responding to letters from hopeful kids. The commercial is backed by a soppy soundtrack throughout. Respondents to the video didn't find it heartwarming at all. Disgusting video and one any children should not be seeing. Totally politicizing COVID with Santa. What were you thinking? Complained to Ofcom already, said one. If anyone thinks that this ad is either clever or funny or poignant, they are sadly deluded, said another. Should have shown the reality, a nurse passing the infection to a patient, discharging a COVID POS patient to a care home, commented another. So apparently, yeah, that advertisement in the UK did not sit well with folks and lots of backlash. Why in the Sam hell do they have to try and politicize every damn thing that we do? Why? They just cannot help themselves in what they want to control, folks, at the end of the day. And they see it as their obligation to try and throw that in our face every single time. So another interesting article that came through. Let's see. The Dehumanizing Danger of Social Media. Pretty good article. It came via The Critic. Was authored by Josephine Bartosh the other day. So obviously many of us who are on social media sites or have been, whether it be the Facebooks, the Twitters, I suppose you might consider throwing YouTube in underneath that umbrella. Quickly finding out that, staying behind enemy lines is a tough deal. You're probably going to get chastised, you're going to get shadow banned, you're going to get timeouts and Twitterati jail, whatever. So people are jumping off to alternative platforms. The Parlors, the Gabs, you name it. But this article is going to touch upon that. And what is the danger behind this stuff? So the pandemic has been a technologist's wet dream. Forcing people online has accelerated what were already inevitable changes. Social distancing started a long time before the threat of contagion, sometime around 2005 with the spread of the high-speed internet. Interesting thought, right? Because after all, these social media sites do not make us any more social, but more or less antisocial. We just play keyboard jockeys, right? Says in the previous decade, technologists shared a utopian vision of the digital world as a space where, freed from prejudice, mind could meet mind. John Perry Barlow's stirring 1996 Declaration of the Independence of Cyberspace described it as a world both everywhere and nowhere, not where bodies live. The unmooring of mind from body has left people adrift, navigating a turbulent online world without the reassuring markers humans evolved to recognize. Infamously, in 2014, Facebook changed the site to offer 72 gender options rather than the two sexes. Brielle Harrison, a software engineer quoted at the time, claimed, "People are given this binary option. Do you want to be male or female? What is your gender?" And it's kind of disheartening because none of those let us tell others who we really are. End quote. It seems who we really are is now determined by how one chooses to present on social media, what we want rather than what we are. 1 year later, and Facebook changed the gender option to an open text box for self-description, the ultimate individualized identity. To the bafflement of many older lesbian, gay, and bisexual people, increasing numbers of those under 30 now identify as quote-unquote queer. The Guardian recently launched a series called Genderqueer Generation on the children and young adults who are rejecting traditional gender identities. One interviewee in the series, a teenager called River, explains, "I discovered the whole LGBTQ community online around 2017 when I started using social media more often. The internet had a big role in me discovering myself. Online, I felt understood. I felt helped. I feel like the internet tells us stuff that we can't learn in real life." Whether the genderqueer generation are, as some research suggests, autistic kids turning online to make sense of not fitting in, or simply typically self-absorbed adolescents indulging in some time-honored teen angst, it is clear that time online has shaped their identities and sexuality. In the U.S., there is now an emerging market in cosmetic surgeries whereby bodies can be cosmetically altered to match a client's internal sense of self as outside the gender binary. For females, procedures include the closure of the vaginal cavity. For males, pseudo-vaginas are bored into the perineum. It seems our analog bodies no longer fit the demands of digitally addled minds. This internet-fueled crisis of sexuality and identity is pulling in youth across the world. In the UK, some credulous adults old enough to know better have fallen for this nonsense too. A case in point is Liberal Democrat MP and party leadership contender Layla Moran, who identifies as pansexual, and in a Westminster debate claimed to be able to see beyond the material sex of bodies and into the gender of an individual's quote-unquote soul. Say what? What the hell does that even mean? Sort of malarkey is that? I have no idea. Diane W., appreciate the donation. So sick. I'm as sick, no pun intended. Yeah, understood. In any case, at 37, Moran is the exception. The overwhelming majority of those who opt for nonsense identity markers are of iGen, the internet generation. Those under 26 who have come of age since the dawn of social media and the widespread availability of online body-punishing pornography. Kathleen Richardson, professor of ethics and culture of robotics and AI at De Montfort University, Leicester, argues that a politics of love is necessary to counter the further descent into anarchy. Rather than seeing the youth of today as profoundly happy with this cult of consumer self-making, the research indicates they are in despair, and worse still, are shunning opportunities to develop critical perspectives that could help them out of quagmire. Technology is not neutral. It is an industry where the libertarian views of Silicon Valley's founding fathers meets with the commercial imperative. The result is a space where sexual freedom of men is paid for by women's bodies, from so-called sugar daddy dating apps where rich older men pay for the company and often the sexual favors of young hard-up women, to streamed online abuse to order access to what was once the preserve of red light districts has been put into our hands in the forms of the mobile phone. I spoke to a woman who wanted to be known as quote-unquote Ginger. As a young woman struggling with drug addiction, Ginger did not consider her decision to enter pornography to be freely made. Describing her experience on the platform OnlyFans, she told me, "There's so much competition that women need to be doing more extreme things. The massive emphasis on looks means that they are editing themselves to be unrecognizable. The women advertise themselves like products." End quote. Arguably, to some degree, we each now advertise and curate our online selves as products, mindful that the wrong tweet or like could cause reputational damage or even end our careers, as in the recent case of author Gillian Phillip, who was sacked using a hashtag which signaled support for J.K. Rowling, now persona non grata, following accusations of wrongthink. There is an additional catch to sites such as OnlyFans. As with social media, popularity is measured and monetized by numbers of followers. Explaining the psychological impact of what keeps women on the site, Ginger says, "It's a boost to know that men find you attractive enough to buy your nudes. Even if you aren't attracted to them, it becomes addictive." For Ginger and young women like her, attention from strangers she has no interest in is fundamentally woven into self-worth. Perhaps this is not surprising. From selfies to sexting, the mobile phone has reduced too many women's online experience to a sexualized performance for an online audience. The sexual revolution prompted by pornography has all but eradicated shame, and yet people are having less sex than ever before. More concerningly, the sexual script has been warped by exposure to pornographic content. In a 2019 essay, Pascal Emmanuel Galbry, fellow of the Ethics and Policy Center in Washington, D.C., posits, "Once you are addicted to online porn, the thing that provides the biggest dopamine jolt is whatever is most shocking. And the reward cycle means you need a bigger dopamine boost every time. Something newer, more shocking." Indeed, this goes some way to explaining the surprisingly common phenomena of straight men looking at gay pornography. This is to say nothing of the role of pornography in creating transgender identities and fetishes, which is well documented though. Ironically, something of a taboo to discuss. While the urge to look at shocking content is a neurological response, the descent into more extreme material is facilitated by algorithms. In a 2018 article for the New York Times, researcher Zeynep Tufekci criticized YouTube for facilitating extremism through the autoplay function. She explained, "You are never, quote-unquote, hardcore enough for YouTube's recommendation algorithm. It promotes, recommends, and disseminates videos in a manner that appears to constantly up the stakes. YouTube admits it has a problem and has promised to make it harder for policy-violating content to surface. But pornography providers, many of whom use recommendation algorithms similar to those of YouTube, escape such scrutiny. If the trajectory from moderate to extreme political content has implications for democracy, it is fair to ask what the attraction to extreme pornography might mean for society as a whole. Would the citizens of the U.S. have elected a president who famously boasted of grabbing women by the pussy if they lived in a society where women were routinely degraded in the pornography industry? For Professor Richardson, the digital addiction is political. She argues that technology corporations and queer theory activists are driving the rush into hyper-individualism, leaving no structure within which to frame human experience, nor legally protect human experience and bodies. She continues, "In my work, I draw attention to the way in which social sciences promoted the same thinking as tech corporations to break down the ultimate boundary between people and property, and to end protections of natural persons so that a market can flourish in intimate relations." Pornography effectively rewires the brain's reward system to no longer be being triggered by, for example, the feel of another person's skin or even sex, but by pornography itself, naturally fostering fetishes and peccadillos that a real-life partner will struggle to satisfy as a canny way to ensure repeat custom. Indeed, it could be argued that the use of internet to facilitate an orgasm is itself a fetish, because the device, whether phone, laptop, or virtual reality headset, is a proxy for mutual sexual enjoyment. Richardson is correct that the boundary between people and property is being systematically broken down, both in the form of customized surgeries to match the personas we each now advertise online, and in the burgeoning market for sex robots. This dystopian reality, where boys have seen rape pornography before their first kiss and girls base their value on sexy selfies, is belied by the warm, fuzzy straplines and mission statements of technology companies. It is perhaps not surprising that when young people, traumatized by digital exposure and with no solid sense of self, turn online, searching for an authoritative framework to make sense of their feelings, they often fall prey to a censorious, tyrannical groupthink. Mocking the plethora of new sexual and gender identities as an adolescent fad is too easy. However ridiculous, there is real suffering underscoring internet-informed delusions. These are not just the growing pains of a new generation. They're serious symptoms of a deep-seated social malaise. Technology has wrenched mind from body. Far from bringing us together, the digital world is breaking us apart. So kind of an interesting article. Lots to unpack there. Obviously, they kind of went the sexual side of things, obviously. But very interesting nonetheless. So, yeah, looking back up through chat here real quick. Did it stick? Oh, there we go. Yeah, very, very interesting. So, yes, social distancing, socializing, social everything, social media. Does it work? I don't think anything necessarily beats actual human contact, but think of what has happened and played out as part of this COVID-19, whether it be the social distancing or mask wearing or everything else. It's caused us to fear our frickin' shadows at the end of the day. And for what? Why shut down churches and synagogues? Is that where people socialize, exchange ideas, thoughts, share faith, whatever? Do they not want us to be able to do that? Perhaps not. More or less, they don't want us gathering and uniting. Keep in mind what Q told us, right? At the end of the day, they want us divided. And that's exactly what that does, divides. Alright, well, another article I found to be interesting out of the American Institute for Economic Research, one that I like pulling from. The expert consensus, quote-unquote, also favored alcohol prohibition. So, keeping in tow with, the science and believing their science and their consensus behind their group of scientists, right? This is kind of what it's alluding to here. Most people today regard America's experiment with alcohol prohibition as a national embarrassment, rightly repealed in 1933. So it will be with the closures and lockdowns of 2020 someday. Probably one of the greatest policy errors of all time, but I think as many of us realize that you've got a lot of folks that tend to be a little power trippy, little petty tyrants, the tin pot dictators, as I like to call them, thinking they have authority where they have none. And because of the ignorance of the populace not knowing their rights, they dutifully carry on and go by said edicts and decrees, even though they carry no weight in law. So, in any case, in 1920, however, to be for the repeal of the prohibition that was passed took courage. You were arguing against prevailing opinion backed by celebratory scientists and exalted social thinkers. What you were saying flew in the face of quote-unquote expert consensus. Mind you, this was back in the 20s, right? So there is an obvious analogy to lockdowns 2020. My first inkling of this prohibition history came in reading transcripts of the then famous radio priest James Gillis from the 1920s. He was against prohibiting alcohol production and sale on grounds that the social costs far outweighed the supposed benefits. What surprised me was the defensiveness of his comments. He had to assure his listeners that he was personally for temperance, that alcohol was indeed demon rum, that it's true that this nasty stuff had caused terrible things to happen to the country. Still, he said, outright bans are too costly. Why was he so cautious in his rhetoric? It turns out that during the 1920s he was one of the few famous American public figures. H.L. Mencken was also among them, who dared to speak out against what was obviously a disastrous policy. Reading this sent me down a rabbit hole of literature at the time in which it was argued by many leading intellectuals that prohibition made perfect sense as a necessary step to clean up the social order. To sum up the quote-unquote science behind prohibition, society had tremendous numbers of pathologies on the loose, and they all traced to one dominant variable: liquor. There was poverty, crime, fatherless households, illiteracy, political alienation, social immobility, city squalor, and so on. You can look carefully at the data to find that in all these cases there is a common element of alcohol. It only stands to reason that eliminating this factor would be the single greatest contribution to eliminating the pathologies. The evidence was incontrovertible. Do this, then that, and you are done. To be sure, the argument wasn't always as clean. Simon Patton, who lived from 1852 to 1922, was chair of the Wharton School of Business. His late 19th century argument for alcohol prohibition featured a complicated argument concerning the weather in America. It gets cold, then hot, then cold, and alcohol consumption seems to track these changes, driving people to drink ever more until their lives fall apart. Interesting. As summarized by Mark Thornton, who is the leading scholar on the economics of prohibition and its history, for Patton, alcohol is a product with no equilibrium in consumption. One is either good and abstains from alcohol, or one becomes a drunkard and self-destructs. The most influential prohibition economist of the next generation was the rock star academic and social progressive Irving Fisher, whose contributions to making economics more about data than theory are legendary. So was his push for eugenics. No surprise if you know this period and such people, but he was also a passionate opponent of all alcohol. It was he who made a decisive difference in convincing Congress and the public that a complete ban was the right way. His oddly titled book, Prohibition at its Worst, from 1927, lays it all out. The same year of its publication, Fisher called for a roundtable at the annual meeting of the American Economic Association. His own account is revealing. I got a list of the economists who are supposed to be opposed to prohibition and wrote to them. They all replied either that I was mistaken in thinking that they were opposed to prohibition, or that, if we were going to confine the discussion to the economics of prohibition, they would not care to respond. When I found that I was to have no speaker representing the opposite point of view, I wrote to all American economists listed in Minerva and all American teachers of statistics. I have not received from anyone an acceptance. Clearly, his colleagues were either bamboozled by the prevailing quote-unquote science or afraid to disagree with the reigning orthodoxy. Even his political establishments were being corrupted. Crime and liquor lords were rising up all over the country, and tens of thousands of speakeasies were thriving, claiming that prohibition had created $6 billion in wealth for the U.S., a figure that was frequently cited as authoritative. Fisher wrote the following: "Prohibition is here to stay. If not enforced, its blessings will speedily turn into a curse. There is no time to lose. Although things are much better than before Prohibition, with the possible exception of disrespect for law, they may not stay so. Enforcement will cure disrespect for law and other evils complained of, as well as greatly augment the good. American Prohibition will then go down in history as ushering in a new era in the world, in which accomplishment this nation will take pride forever." What does that sound like? Holy crap. What do we hear mouthpieces like Fauci say after his little shticks and that in front of the camera? Oh, yes. By the way, about those vaccines, you're probably going to need to wear a mask for quite some time. Masks are here to stay, right? And never mind the fact that this all plays so very nicely into the Great Reset that they want to impose. Because we're just supposed to roll over and take it. Obedience. To see how the $6 billion figure was calculated and to observe the rest of the astonishing mathematical gymnastics behind the quote-unquote science backing prohibition, have a look at Thornton's detailed presentation. It's a perfect picture of pseudoscience in action. Kind of reminds us of the models and that out of the UK early in the days that were projecting, oh my God, we're going to have millions of people dying. And what happened? Nothing. Not anywhere close. The models were not even close. But it was hardly unusual for the time. The journal The American Medical Association said of alcohol prohibition in 1920, "Most of us are convinced that it is one of the most beneficent acts ever passed by a legislature." Reading through all this literature, I'm reminded of the CDC's scientific conclusion that closing restaurants during a pandemic will save lives. A conclusion based on a study so weak that anyone with a passing familiarity with statistics and casually can immediately observe its failings. The same study, if it demonstrates that, would also demonstrate that masks make no difference in virus spread. Another obvious case was the brutal and unscientific closures of schools. Also true is that the opponents of Prohibition were routinely and publicly denounced as secret drunks, shilling for bootleggers, or just not following the science. They were the outliers and stayed that way for a decade. What finally broke Prohibition was not the replacement of one scientific orthodoxy for another, but the non-compliance on the part of most of the population. When enforcement became unviable, and FDR saw opposition to Prohibition as politically advantageous, the law finally changed. When we look back on American history, Prohibition stands out as one of the craziest social and economic experiments of modern times. The very idea that the government on its own authority and power was going to purge from a Western society the production and distribution of alcohol strikes us today as a millenarian pipe dream, one that turned into disaster for the whole country. Now, we could say the same about lockdowns in 2020. Indeed, measuring the absurdities on a scale of extremism, the idea of lockdowns with forceful human separation, mandatory masking, and the practical abolition of all large gatherings, fun, art, and travel seems even more sadistically preposterous than alcohol prohibition. The madness of crowds, often backed by the best science, never goes away. It just finds new forms of legal expression in new times. Only once the crowds come to their senses do the real scientists make a comeback and prevail, while the fake science, the back despotism, pretends like it never happened. So, very interesting parallels, I thought, comparing the lockdowns, the COVID, the masks, the science. Always believe the science, they tell us, right? So what's different between 1920 and Prohibition versus today? Not much. Big tech, television, bigger entities trying to change public opinion. That's about it. Are they doing a good job? They'll try. But it's too late. Way too late for them. They're late to the party. So, very, very interesting. So that leads to a final piece here tonight before I kind of open it up. The viral assault on small businesses. So kind of continuing on the same vein. Eamon Gordon over at Economic Prism had this to say. Says this year, fear of a deadly pandemic triggered the ruling class to spread authoritarian lockdown orders. The god of science, like a burning bush, told them to remove their sandals and deliver policies of regression. A paranoid public was quick to comply. Humans have been battling viruses since well before the wheel was invented. According to archaeologists, a fast-moving epidemic roughly 5,000 years ago wiped out a prehistoric village in what is today northeastern China. Dead bodies were stuffed inside a dwelling, the Hamin Manga, that was later burned down. Another mass burial, the Miazgo site, took place about the same time and in the same general area. Together, these discoveries suggest there was a rapid outbreak of an acute infectious disease. An epidemic ravaged the entire region. The viral spread of submicroscopic pathogens has the potential to alter the flow of history. Soldiers returning to the Roman Empire after war against Parthia in 165 AD brought back more than the spoils of conquest. The Antoine Plague, which is suspected to have been smallpox or measles, claimed an estimated 5 million lives. The epidemic had devastating consequences throughout the Roman Empire. perhaps bringing forward the demise of Pax Romana. About 1,350 years later, Spanish forces led by Hernan Cortes delivered the gift of smallpox as they conquered the Aztec capital of Tenochtitlan. About a decade later, Spanish conquerors spread the plague to the Incas. An estimated 90% of the native population was killed off by the pestilence. Aztec and Inca civilizations were swiftly wiped off the map and replaced by New Spain, the Court of Sinister. Plague of Athens, Plague of Cyprian, Plague of Justinian, Black Death, Coccolizli epidemic, Great Plague of London, Great Plague of Marseille, Russian Plague, Philadelphia Yellow Fever epidemic, American Polio epidemic, Spanish flu, Asian flu, swine flu, West African Ebola epidemic, Zika virus epidemic, and many others. Indeed, plagues come and go, yet they can dispense lasting consequences. Sometimes, as is the case with coronavirus, pandemics have much less to do with the virus than the societal change the virus activates. Marcus Aurelius, the last of the 5 good emperors in the time of the Antonine Plague, penned the following in his Meditations. To hear in mind constantly that all of this has happened before and will happen again, the same plot from beginning to end, the identical staging, produce them in your mind as you know them from experience or from history. The court of Hadrian, of Antoninus, the courts of Philip, Alexander, Croesus, all just the same, only the people different. Maybe so. But the plot in 2020 is staged in the court of Sinister. Fear of a deadly pandemic has opened the door for madmen to walk through. Upon entering the court, they put into practice sinister plans for controlling populations and swelling dependency. According to state and local governments, constitutional rights are not rights at all. They're privileges. And they've been suspended in your best interest. To keep you safe. Moreover, if you want to work, have extended family over for dinner, worship with a congregation, or walk down the street without a mask, you're selfish. You're not doing your part to stop the spread. Klaus Schwab, a madman and founder of the World Economic Forum, is a man of social science-based totalitarian rule. Individuals that think for themselves and pay their own way in life are not part of his master plan. He prefers a docile public, subsisting one notch above poverty that's fully dependent on a global state. In his new book, COVID-19, The Great Reset, Schwab and his co-author admit that COVID-19 is, quote, one of the least deadly pandemics in the last 2,000 years, end quote. Yet the ruling class has acted like this is the new smallpox. What gives? So the viral assault on small businesses. COVID-19 has provided the perfect cover, Schwab's disciples, to assault one of America's remaining expressions of freedom and independence, small businesses. With lockdowns, politicians get to pick and choose what businesses survive and what businesses don't. They get to decide who's essential and who isn't. By and large, corporations having interests aligned with politicians are considered essential. Small businesses aren't. Walmart lives, Dick's Barber Shop dies. McDonald's survives, Tito's Tacos doesn't. What's more, legislation with the supposed intent to stop the spread of coronavirus has devastated small businesses. Roughly 100,000 small businesses have permanently closed. At the same time, big corporations are reaping record profits. One of the most tyrannical laws, which is acting as a viral assault on small businesses, is something warmly named the Families First Coronavirus Response Act, FFCRA. Attorney Ash Staub explains. The FFCRA, passed in March of this year, requires businesses to provide 2 weeks of paid sick leave for quarantined employees and or employees experiencing COVID-19 related symptoms. It also requires 2 weeks of paid sick leave at 2/3 the regular rate of pay for employees who need to care for quarantined individuals, such as elderly relatives or spouses. Furthermore, employers must also provide 10 weeks of extended leave, also at 2/3 the regular rate of pay, for employees caring for their children due to school closures. The FFCRA only applies to employers with fewer than 500 employees. Thus, the FFCRA has imposed financial obligations on small businesses while exempting big businesses. Small businesses are forced to pay the cost of complying with the FFCRA, while big businesses are not. Small businesses are at risk of FFCRA-related lawsuits. Big businesses are not. The FFCRA clearly disadvantages small businesses, and expecting small businesses to incur the cost of the FFCRA while their revenue plummets and their corporate competition profits is a recipe for widespread small business bankruptcy. And for every small business that's crushed by autocratic rule, there's the corresponding loss of the owner's dreams and their employees' livelihoods. But that's not all. It also denotes another step from freedom and liberty towards control and dependency, and into a darker, more medieval world. So there you have it. The viral assault on small businesses. That's exactly what they want. They think that we're going to just idly sit by. Will we sit for 10 years and let this fester and continue down this path like what happened back in the Prohibition days? God, I hope not. I sincerely hope not. I mean, we see glimmers of hopes periodically in the news, do we not? You know, we see up in New York and New Jersey, gym owners defying lockdown orders by their little petty tyrant governors, giving edicts and declaring themselves autonomous zones, even going so far as doing that. But it's perfectly okay for Antifa to set up autonomous zones in the middle of Portland, but not so much for the business owner who is just trying to make a living. Same thing with restaurant owners who have had to do similar measures. Thinking of the gal out in California who right next door in a parking lot had an NBC production for some show. She couldn't be open, but they could. So this virus supposedly is very selective in its approach. It's going to take a hell of a lot more than just those couple people standing up to this stuff. Blue state, red state, doesn't matter at the end of the day. And I sincerely hope you guys as business owners, entrepreneurs, and everything else consider that. The days of worrying about state licenses and stuff like that, I think those are gone. You cannot simultaneously hold the belief that we're beholden to the government on one hand while sitting watching your livelihood be destroyed in many different fashions on the other side. Right? So, something to consider. Alright, well, aside from some of that discussion here this evening, what do you guys think about what has happened with the Supreme Court ruling on Texas and all that stuff? Are you down? You out? Still hopeful? Did any of you guys happen to catch the DC goings on here today with all the speakers and whatnot? I did happen to catch Flynn on stage for part of that. See the flyover with POTUS a couple, 2-3 times, and Marine One and helicopter passing through the site. December 18th is a big day. Due and lighten burning. Yeah, I do think that there's probably some key dates in that coming up. What do they all allude to? I'm not sure, but there's certainly some major alignments taking place here over the course of the next week. I think December 21st is a big one by way of stars and that truly being in alignment. Will we see the tide turn between now and then? It's hard to say. Some of those that do the prophecy type stuff online, perhaps you've caught some of them, suggest that between today, tomorrow, next couple days, we may see something. I don't know. We'll just keep our eyes on it. Okay. Yeah, executive order for election interference, 45 days from election. Okay, so yeah, we will have eclipsed 45 days. Man, how time flies, good God. Many of you will probably know that I've been keeping tabs on a lot of the headlines, the goings on with the swing states and whatnot around the country since Election Day. I think to date I'm probably north of about 4,400 articles to the good in that regard. Non-Mockingbird media sites, obviously, but certainly looking for something to change. And of course, here today was probably one of the quietest it's been in quite a while. About every day, day and a half, I'm able to get a little bit of a data poll and pull all that stuff together, and things have, it seems to have gone kind of quiet, but there's still a long ways to go, right? At the end of the day, the only date that matters out of all this is the 20th of January, that is spelled out in the Constitution, period. Everything else is moot. So until we get up to and through that point, there's no reason to worry yet. A lot of different options and that can still play out. But here's what it is doing, right? And see if you agree. As this plays out, the one thing that I see, I'll pause right there. I thought it was very prescient of General Flynn 3 days ago told Bartiromo, I think SCOTUS is going to tell state legislatures to do what Constitution mandates. He knows what Powell has. Yeah, to that point, University alum, I would say there's a couple schools of thought to this, right? And it has to do with the optics around Sydney versus what the campaign team did. They had kind of this mutual split, if you will, the other week. I think based on what we're seeing play out, there has to be kind of the civil side of things that approach it from the election standpoint, and then you have the criminal side, which I think is what we're going to likely see via Sidney Powell and the RICO case, and that's going to play out. So that, to me, is more of a macro level that's going to ensnare a lot more folks, because now it involves foreign entities, which we know interfered, regardless of what the Mockingbird media and all these idiots say. No evidence, BS. There's tons of evidence. They're just corrupt. And so I think we'll let it play out. I think there will be perhaps some movement in the courts. But the one thing that is, in my opinion, that is played out is the true dark to light fashion where all the corruption resides, right? Obviously, we did not know going into this election how corrupt your election commissions were in your respective states. We did not know how embedded this Dominion voting system was and the payoffs and everything else, both sides of the aisle in the respective states. We also probably were not enlightened to the fact that your secretaries of state, your lieutenant governors, your attorney generals, and your governors in your respective states were also on the take. So it's highlighted all of that. Now, take that a step further. As these court cases have started to file through, before the election there were over 300 cases now that they're still churning through, by the way, up to and including the ones that Sidney and Giuliani and a lot of these Trump team cases that have been put forward. But what is it also doing at the same time while exposing all the state and local level corruption and how deep, far, and wide that goes, the swamp? It's also highlighting the payoffs behind the scenes of all the circuit court, the appeals court justices, and perhaps, if yesterday was any indication, the Supreme Court as well. So, what does that mean? It means we truly do not have a system of justice in this country, and it shouldn't be any more evident than what we saw via Flynn and the railroading and BS they went through Emmett Sullivan, right? I mean, I don't know how much more plain we have to make it show us that we are indeed a banana republic where there is a two-tier just us system, period. There are no equal tenants under the law, right? So, how does one reverse that? Well, I think we have gotten cues from the early days, CUES, not letter Q, but nonetheless you understand where I'm heading. The early days, back in 2017, as the information was dispelled, what was made known. We're not going to see the change through the courts. Military is the only way. So will we let this thing play out all the way to and through January 20th? Perhaps. Will we see any sort of developments between now and then that may change things? Maybe. Don't know. We'll have to keep an eye on it. But I'm not sure at what point the military side of things starts to engage, because we already knew prior to the election there was troop movements and that into a lot of these areas. So it's going to get very, very interesting to see what happens here over the next 30 plus days leading up to January 20th. So head on a swivel, obviously, I would say at this point. Jane Winkle says if Biden and Harris sit in the White House, the circuit for the fourth industrial revolution and the Great Reset is complete. How we stop this, heaven knows. People en masse, oops, scrolled past. Hang on. Come back here. People en masse must unite worldwide, yes. Obviously, they think they're going to divide. And I would tend to believe that the polls, the Pew researches and everything else, all the BS polls now that we saw leading into the election, way off. Way, way, way off. If we were told early in 2017 that 4 to 6% were probably beyond lost, not going to change, that's probably still true today. So I would tend to believe there's more people that are seeing this play out and probably are going to swing to the right side. University Alum says, we must know that Flynn, especially with client attorney privilege, has been filling in the blanks and dots as Powell builds a government overthrow case. That gives me great confidence. Okay. Yeah, I'll take your word for that. Like I said, there's many different ways in which this thing can go. I think a lot of people will probably look at these court cases and say, well, it's going to get decided in the courts just like, 37 days after Bush Gore in 2000. That's how long it took. Perhaps we may see some of that, but based on what we're seeing play out here today, the frivolousness. I mean, take a look at what just happened in Wisconsin today. 2 justices kick the thing out regardless of how much evidence is behind there because it appears it's racist. What the hell does that have to do with anything? You see, these quote-unquote justices, these L's, these black-robe high priests that sit behind the bench, they don't know law. They know color of law and what little they're told when they're painted inside that box, but they do not know law. They're mainly just administrators at the end of the day. AR-15. Well, it's probably good to be ready just in case. Let's see. So Biden live streams get taken off, but Trump live streams can stay on. Yeah, I don't know. Let's see. Anything else you guys have? About to see a soya shortage affects every aspect from animal food right up to us. Soya can be found in many of our products. Yeah, I would say that they will try to do that. I think we'll... Let's see, an article just come through here today. It says if you like cookies, they might be in short supply here soon. Highlighting the fact of it either Keebler or somebody. I can't remember which of the mega brands that owns Pepperidge Farms. Basically, they were citing the fact that there's a supply shortage and can't get certain ingredients to make certain cookies. So, yeah, I mean, they'll try their damnedest to try and go that route, because what better to bring a society into compliance than withhold food? Bargeromo says, on a scale of 1 to 10, what rating would you give the odds of Trump being inaugurated? Flynn, 10 without hesitation. Yeah, I did hear that as well. So, obviously they know something. We might not be akin to that yet. To me, I do believe there was some messaging going on when we got the post the other night on Tuesday after 25 days, 16 hours, 44 minutes, and 55 seconds. 25 days is 5 times 5, and then end with 55 seconds. And if you look at the timestamps of 49, 52, and 53, all having 5s in them, clearly there's some messaging going on. What all that entails yet is hard to say. But even I recognize that there was some bleed through into headlines and that on that day as well. So who knows where this is going to go at the end of the day. I think we're going to be in for one hell of a ride. And of course, Flynn also said this today, that we're in unprecedented times. We don't really have a marker or any sort of benchmark to go back and compare this to. You've heard me talk at length about what happened with Rutherford B. Hayes. Yes, in that case, there was a brokered deal behind the scenes when they set multiple sets of electors from various states. The corruption was probably equally as bad back then, perhaps. Maybe not, I don't know. But nonetheless, that option is one that still exists and is on the table here that could play out as well. And I believe that Arizona is indeed at a point where they're going to push that out. So if they have indeed, certified their results based on fraudulent numbers and approved by the governor, lieutenant governor, secretary of state, stamped, whatever, and they send their set of electors based on fraud, then it should come down to the right of the people to push their own set of electors that does the will of the people. Because now the local governments and the legislature of your respective states have abdicated their authority. Period. And probably should all be removed. And that should also probably play out in all the rest of the swing states, if the people have the fortitude. Alright, well, this is never going to be a DOJ Supreme Court thing. It's been a military op from the beginning. The more they stay out of it, the better. Yeah, I don't disagree. The drawback to that, obviously, is the optics, because, yes, I think even in the last week we saw Flynn call for, using the Insurrection Act. Trump's got absolutely nothing to lose in doing that right now. Nothing to lose. Would he be viewed as a Hitler dictator? Well, how is that any different than what the Mockingbird media already does? To me, I think if it does indeed go that route, I think the reach is going to be spectacular. And what do I mean by that? Oh no, it's not going to stop at your local politicians and election heads and everything else. No, it's probably going to take out media heads. It's going to take out big tech heads, and everybody in between. They've got the goods on all of it. Military intelligence has it all. So it's truly going to be one for the ages. You see the Anon's comments regarding POTUS special address on vaccines, the first three references. Yeah, I did hear that as well. Pfizer versus Pfizer. Yep. Yeah, I'm not exactly sure where that leads, but I also find it very interesting the timing, right, of what has been coming out here as of late. We just got word that supposedly, according to the Wall Street Journal, that Barr has been sitting on this Biden information since way before the lead up to the campaign season here. Does that have merit? I don't know, maybe. We also get information about Seth Rich stuff. You got people pushing for Assange to be pardoned, and that to me is something likely that could happen. And at the same time, why are we now seeing the Hunter Biden stuff come back around? You know, why did they try so hard to bury it before? I mean, good Lord, they buried New York Post for, what was it, 10 days, 12 days? Banned them off of Twitter for the very same stuff, but now it's perfectly okay. And now they're going to try and push Joe out, probably 25th Amendment him, and sweep in with Kamala, and all will be good? Well, I might suggest a different option to that. And that's the fact that convicted felons or anybody that has crimes and that can't be elected as president as per what is in our Federalist Papers and our Constitution. So there's that possibility as well. Yeah, that's the very same question that I have, University Yellow. Why in the world would MSM be even remotely willing to cover now? Well, perhaps they know their goose is cooked. Perhaps they know that they rode the ship as far as they could with Biden, and now it's time to 25th Amendment them, because if you remember right, just prior to the election, what was Nancy Pelosi pushing? The 25th Amendment. Well, it wasn't necessarily for POTUS. They've already gone that route. But the thought process was, just prior to the election, that, the 25th Amendment is going to be what ultimately takes out Biden and installs Kamala Harris. And they gave cues throughout their campaign, did they not? How many slip-ups did they have where they called it the Harris-Biden ticket? We heard them in their own words, not just Joe, but also Kamala at the same time. So perhaps now would be the time to try and do that bait and switch. We'll have to see. All right, folks. Well, I think I've rambled on here enough this evening. Appreciate you guys tuning in for a fireside. We'll keep doing these as time goes on here. Keep tabs on all the stuff that's coming at us. I mean, it's been like a fire hose to drink from, but we'll manage. We'll get by. And we'll just have some casual conversations on some cold nights, chilly nights, gather our beverages, and have a little fire, have a little discussion. So that being said, appreciate you guys tuning in. Be sure to stop by the channel tomorrow. I think they will probably have their Sunday round table again. I won't be in the house for that, as I do have a prior obligation. But do check back in here tomorrow for that. So until then, we'll see you later.